we'll give everybody just another minute to come on in from the corridor. Okay, because we're only going to do this 2 times this evening, I want to give everybody who's still lingering out there 1 more minute to come on in. Okay, I think we netted about as many people out of the corridor as we could. So we'll go ahead and get started. First of all, thank you for being here. Welcome to our 3rd open house as part of this comprehensive plan and long-range transportation plan process. Our goal for this presentation is for me to talk to you for about 20 to 25 minutes at the very most. We'll have a little bit of time for question and answer at the end, and then I will strongly encourage you to make your way right back out of here and talk with my colleagues and town staff throughout the corridor, and then farther down the hall in the Emergency Operations Center to talk about what's been happening with the land use district maps. I will mention to you that 100% of the content available here at this meeting, whether it's on a board in the hallway, down the hall in the Emergency Operations Center, this presentation, all of this material will be available online. In fact, most of it is already online. This meeting is being recorded. We're being live streamed right now, so please keep that in mind. Ideally, what we want to make sure of is that we're reaching as many people about this planning process as possible. And clearly, 5:15 can be a difficult time to be at a meeting. So not only are we live streaming for people who could not physically be here, but also those who are doing other things and would like to watch it later. So it'll be recorded and hosted on the plan website as well. So getting started, I'd like to introduce to all of you who this planning team is. It's a very balanced effort, actually, to give fair credit to town staff. It's very heavily weighed on town staff, both in the transportation department and the planning department. Liz Boyles and Brad Morrison are the plan leads from the planning department and the transportation departments. My name is Jenny Humphreys. I work for CDM Smith Engineering and Planning, and I'm managing this overall effort and leading the long-range transportation plan of this piece. And my colleagues Greg Dale and Emily Crow have been heavily involved on the drafting the comprehensive plan together with town staff. The purpose of tonight's open house is a very active evening. I hope you brought your energy and your thinking caps and are ready to absorb lots of information. First, I want you to learn about the long-range transportation plan. Where we are in this process is everything you see, please read it as stamped with the word draft, because where we are, we've been processing lots of data, and we're just starting to put our thoughts together in terms of how this is shaping into an LRTP. Please engage with the Plan Forum. I cannot say enough about the members of the Plan Forum who are members of our community here in the town of Mount Pleasant, but they have dedicated an incredible amount of time to this plan development process. Please engage with them in the Emergency Operations Center about what's going on with the district maps, the land use planning maps. And then please participate in the online survey. We do have a SurveyMonkey hosted survey asking for your input on all of the information you're hearing about tonight. So we are working on two major plan documents, the first of which is a comprehensive plan. And what is that? It is an aspirational vision. We have and by the way, this is common content as to what we've presented at previous open houses. It is an aspirational vision for the town. We spent the first several months of this planning process working with technical staff, understanding from the public, what do we want the future of Mount Pleasant to look like? We've developed a statement of policy and intent. So what we want to do is work with that to see where we're going and how is this going to turn into action. And then we use such implementation tools such as an LRTP, Long-Range Transportation Plan, zoning code, capital improvement plans. These are all things that the town will use to implement the aspirational vision and goals that we lay out in the comp plan. Essentially, it's a guide to development decision-making. These are the 9 key elements to a comp plan. The comprehensive plan document is something that's required in South Carolina. Updates are required every 5 years. We're slightly ahead of schedule because it was approximately a year ago the town recognized, both through comments from the public as well as the interests of council and other elected officials, that we just felt like it was time to go ahead and do an update. And we needed to take a deeper dive into the transportation issues. We're dealing with traffic, we're dealing with growth, what are we supposed to do? So the technical team and the planning and transportation departments of the town put this scope of work together to really attack these two deliverables together. Typically, a comprehensive plan document has transportation as just a section, a chapter, if you will, as to what are our mobility goals and what types of things do we need to do to improve mobility. What we're doing differently, and the town of Mount Pleasant is the first municipality in South Carolina to do this joined planning process. Fortunately, unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, they're usually done separately, where we do a land use plan first, and then you do a transportation plan to support that. Or you do a transportation plan and say, uh-oh, that's not gonna work, let's update our comprehensive plan. So you'll hear me use the term planning linkages several times throughout this presentation. And I have to tell you, the land use planning team and the transportation planning team and the Plan Forum, it just keeps hitting us over and over again how great it is that we're doing these things together. Because many of these recommendations may sound like a transportation recommendation, but it's going to be in the comp plan. And comprehensive plan issues are going to manifest themselves into LRTP recommendations. So an LRTP document, and these are very traditional chapters that we do in lots of different communities around the country. You start out with existing conditions. You take a look at the needs. What are we going to need as we move into the future? Public engagement is the root of everything, and we document all of those activities. We integrate land use planning into that, and then we take a look at the multimodal options out there. Finally, that we'll head into this summer is taking a look at the project prioritization and funding, and that's our implementation strategy that turns into your capital improvement program. Those planning linkages, this graphic illustrates this in terms of that cause and effect relationship across all of our different planning options and techniques and issues that we face every day as a municipality. And over, each step along the way, I mean, our team speaks weekly about what did you run into, what are you hearing, what's the data telling us. So where are we in this process? So we really hit the ground running last summer, and here we are where the red box is. This is our third open house. And so I would say we're right around that 80% mark in terms of completing the amount of the total work effort we need to do. But personally speaking, I feel like this last 20% is when it really gets exciting, when we start turning this into action. So what I'd like for you to notice is these are lots of things that we've been doing over the last several months, but really more importantly, moving ahead through the summer, we'll be developing both the comprehensive plan document and the LRTP documents. So what you see tonight in terms of transportation and land use, again, draft form, and please give us your reaction because we want to incorporate your input as we refine these concepts. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and start talking about some data. Forces and trends. These are the things that we started looking at last summer all the way through the fall. And these are not numbers that we've pulled out of the newspaper. I feel like we have another article about growth and these types of trends almost daily around here. So these are the numbers that we've been working off of since last year. The sources are the American Community Survey, which is from the US Census Bureau, and the Mount Pleasant Planning Department. So in terms of what we're looking at into the future and plan development. So what we've done is take those forces and trends, and that was just a very brief snapshot, and we incorporate that into that needs assessment and existing conditions for the long-range transportation plan. So the actual work items that we've been progressing in the development of that LRTP is we start with data collection. And we start with those demographics, the things that were on that previous slide, but we'll dig into more of the transportation-related trends that we've been seeing. We do some analysis, public involvement permeates the entire process, and here we are at number 4 where we've started to develop those recommendations. As mentioned, as we get your input on those, we'll move into the finalization of the plan and move into implementation in the fall. I'd like to say up front a big thank you to our partner agencies. Land use planning typically happens within a municipal boundary, within the jurisdiction of the municipality. What we do in transportation planning typically permeates across municipal boundaries, as you can imagine, because I can't remember the last time I thought to myself, well, I'm not going to go to that store because it's not in my town. So transportation doesn't typically recognize those boundaries, so we have been working with our local, regional, and state partners across multiple modes of transportation. Up to date, that means that we've been sharing data, and we're regularly passing public comments back and forth because there could be a project that Charleston County is doing inside the town, or there's something that BCD-COG is doing. And for those of you who don't know what BCD-COG or CHATS means, Berkeley Charleston Dorchester Council of Governments is our regional council of governments that does predominantly rural planning, but they also house regional transit planning inside of BCD-COG. And CHATS is responsible for urban transportation planning and the manage of state and federal transportation dollars. So they are a major planning partner for data and also our funding management. So Data collection. We're taking a look at crash densities. We worked with the Department of Public Safety to get a snapshot of the last 5 years of accidents that took place inside the town of Mount Pleasant. It's an awful lot of dots, and it's hard to make sense of what in the world do we do with all those dots. So the first thing we do is make a heat map. Some of this may not be too surprising to see the density and the locations of those accidents. Looks about right. Is this affecting your commute from time to time? So it highlights where we've got corridors of concern, but then we dig into that database, which includes detailed records on the nature of the accidents. Because as planners, we want to know, is the road poorly designed? Is it a lighting problem? Do we have an issue with our pavement? Or, as we see here, nearly 90% of the crashes happening in the town of Mount Pleasant are the result of driver error. So again, we go back as planners and say, what can or cannot do about this issue? So safety data was also separated out by non-auto accidents. It's very important to understand what's happening to non-auto users of our infrastructure network and people choosing or needing to get around by other modes of transportation. So what we wanted to do here was overlay that accident data with the available, it's a little hard to see here, but those other bold orange and purple and blue network links are places where we have bicycle or pedestrian infrastructure, whether it's a sidewalk or a striped lane or something like this. And then we take a look at the gaps. Are we addressing the needs, and do we need to go back and revisit some of those facilities and improve them? Working together with the Berkeley-Charleston-Dorchester Council of Governments, we also need to take a look at regional patterns. On the land use side of planning, we can understand what development is happening within the town of Mount Pleasant, and we can have a good, hard conversation about what we want to be, who we want to be, and what we want that to look like. And we can have our own conversation about economic development and what kinds of jobs do we want to attract and things like this. But there are lots of things going on in our region that are outside of our control that we need to be prepared for. So looking at regional travel demand models, along with origin and destination data that's collected through Bluetooth devices, we take a look at where people are going and when, and how they're getting there, which routes are people taking. To briefly describe what you're looking at here, these are estimated person trips. These are not auto trips, they're not truck trips. We start at the very root level of people making trips. So some of these are people walking to the market on the corner, kids riding their bike to school. It also includes people driving across town and taking a truck out of town. What we wanted to talk about with this and think through with you is those percentages of trips that are originating in Mount Pleasant going somewhere else every day, and trips that are originating outside of Mount Pleasant and coming to visit us every day. And then what percentage of trips happening are completely within the town of Mount Pleasant. So as planners, what do we do with this data? Well, I can tell you based on the wonderful dialogue with the Plan Forum this morning, it was so perfectly highlighted the planning linkages between land use and transportation planning. So from a transportation standpoint, this says to me, what kinds of flexibility do people have in their modal options? Can somebody really take a bike? Or would transit make sense? Would local transit make sense versus regional transit? Does somebody have to use a truck? Are they carrying cargo? So that turns us in the direction of what mobility options should we start planning for? Are they short distance local that can have lots of mobility options versus longer distance regional connections? But for the land use planners in the room and other questions, they said, well, does this mean that maybe we need different types of jobs in Mount Pleasant? So it's a lot of fun to go through this dialogue about using the data and how do we use it? What kind of a planning tool does this become? One thing I do want to make clear that I hadn't really thought through to make sure I make clear to you, as we talked about that earlier today with the Plan Forum, is that our destiny is not set in the town of Mount Pleasant. These forecasts, the 2040 forecasts, are based on our previous comprehensive plan and the current transportation network. So as we look at this and we digest it and we start having these conversations about what kind of land use do we want to have in the future, this will also help guide other types of growth scenarios and other types of transportation scenarios. Do we want to build more bridges versus what types of transit connections can we make? Another question that has come up within the Plan Forum work session is, how are we measuring the performance of our transportation network? Traditionally, we've used the term in the analysis called level of service. Many of you have probably heard that if you've participated in any types of projects like this. And a level of service is basically a grade. It's an A, B, C, D, E, or F. It's either free flow as an A or it's severely congested at a level of service F. We decided to shift gears a little bit as we move forward and evaluate growth scenarios and its impact on our roadway network within the town of Mount Pleasant. And we're using an analysis or a metric of travel time reliability. It was mentioned within the Plan Forum, you know, what does level of service D mean anyway? And if you ask FHWA, they'll probably say, well, that's pretty good for an urban area, but that doesn't sound very good because it's like we're settling for a D. So what we wanted to talk about more is this reliability. If I know we're going to have congested speeds at peak time, I just want to know that. And we as planners and as a community, as we look at growth scenarios and look at transportation project recommendations, we'll drop that into the land use element of the trip model, and then we'll estimate how the performance of the network will work, and then we decide, does this work or not? Do these recommendations make sense? So without making major changes, similar to those origin and destination patterns, if we don't change anything and we just move ahead at the way our current comprehensive plan looks, this is about how our infrastructure network looks. And it's pretty much what you might expect. And this is a 2040 estimate at a peak time. And those roadway links such as Long Point Road, US 17 in various locations, this is pretty much what you might expect at peak time. But again, similar to those OD patterns, this is not necessarily our destiny. That's why we use it as a planning tool as we develop recommendations. So that's really the science end of developing an LRTP. There's a whole lot more to it, but that wraps it up in a nutshell. But this is where we really blend the art and the science together, because if all we did was deal with the science, I don't know that you'd really appreciate the transportation network you would end up with. If we were looking for free flow conditions everywhere, we would end up with a whole lot of traffic lanes of traffic that you probably don't want in your community. So what we did is we blend the art and the science of using your input. And I cannot say enough how overwhelmingly impressed our entire team has been on the input we've gotten from the community. We had an open house in the fall. We had one at the early this year. We've had over 2,000 surveys completed online, and if you filled out one of those, you know you spend some time on it. Those things are loaded with questions and difficult things to think about. The average time spent's about 20 minutes per survey. There are some people who've spent much more than that. We added it up with we got an average with those online surveys, over 680 hours of time from all of you and your neighbors and colleagues has gone into this plan so far. So we are breaking some records here. This word cloud are just some of the sentiments that we've heard through those efforts, and it has been quite a pleasure to take the hardcore data and overlay that in maps and in thought and in discussion with what is missing. Let's make sure we are not missing anything with this plan. So we head into the development of recommendations. And this is mostly limited to the LRTP, but we do have lots of overlaps. For the LRTP, we put recommendations into two major buckets. One is infrastructure improvements, as you might imagine. These are modifications to the roads and bike paths and other transportation systems that we have out there. The second category are policies and programs. So these are things that become planning process. It could be design criteria. and so on. And again, I'll go ahead and highlight, this is where those linkages really come into play between the land use and the transportation plan. This map is available. We'll start out with the infrastructure improvements. This map is not going to be particularly easy for you to read up on the screen because there's a lot of information on it. It is available online, it's available in handouts, and it is available within the online survey. So I'll give you an overview of what these recommended projects are. At this point, they are 100% draft and open for comment and feedback. And these came out of a number of sources. Many came forward from previous transportation planning efforts and out of the current capital improvement plan. Some came out of the CHATS regional long-range transportation plan, and CHATS, our regional MPO, does do a regional transportation plan. They tend to focus on larger scale projects, and through that public involvement process and analysis, some projects have emerged, so we wanted to go ahead and test them in our plan as well. They've emerged out of data analysis and public input. The different categories of projects that are illustrated are intersection and interchange projects. And I did get the question already about what does that mean to be an intersection project. It could be something as simple, not that a signal timing is a simple process, but it could be something that is much less disruptive, such as adjusting signal times, or it could be more of a construction project where we might need to modify turn lanes, or perhaps a signed intersection should become a roundabout. We just want to take a closer look at those intersections and see where those improvements could be made. The lines that are blue are proposed widening projects where we've got a roadway that is exceeding design capacity, and we may want to take a look at whether or not additional lanes are necessary. Green lines are proposed new construction projects, new alignments where we want to reinforce the concept of connectivity or providing parallel relief on heavily traveled corridors. And then that lighter green is streetscaping. Now that brighter pink, or the wider pink buffer that you see throughout US 17, and there's also some over on Long Point Road, this is where we're recommending a corridor analysis. It does not mean widening. It means that we have a congestion and or safety issue that we want to take a closer look at in terms of, are we using technology properly? Is there a way to improve the signal function? Is there a way to improve safety in those corridors? We just want to take a look at how to improve the existing right-of-way on those projects, in those corridors. So moving on to the Mount Pleasant Way. The Mount Pleasant Way it was first conceived in the town's bike ped plan 2014? Somewhere in there, about 5 years ago. It was conceptualized very early on in the townwide bike ped plan. And as we were developing goals and objectives and meeting with members of the plan forum about what their vision is for the town and understanding this need for alternative modes of transportation to really help people explore cultural resources, our natural resources, our recreational resources, how can we provide connectivity to those different resources in a non-auto way? So we further developed this concept a little bit with the input of lots of people. And we've laid out this map and some typical sections, which are, again, difficult to see here. So I'm going to send you right out there to look at a board where you can look at it in greater detail. In some places, this could be a bike lane on a road. In many places, we would like for it to be a divided multi-use path of some sort, so it's a bit safer and a little more relaxing for people to use it. But ideally, we would like to make this a town-wide network that connects residential, recreational, historical, and economic resources of the town. So you've possibly heard the term, you can't build your way out of congestion. That is proven time and again across the country, around the world actually. So we move into that second category of recommendations of policies and programs. Again, this will appear both in the LRTP and the comprehensive plan. And we are asking your feedback on these program areas and policy areas. It's on the online survey as well as in your handout if you choose to do the survey on paper. Many of these are self-explanatory, but one I'll point out to, number 4, it seems a bit unclear. So policies and programs the town may implement to achieve maximum efficiency of existing infrastructure. So the way that would become a recommended policy or program, what it would do is say, well, instead of just going out there and widening a road, or before we go out there and build a new road, let's take a look at this existing infrastructure, and is it designed appropriately for our changing needs? Does it include a bike path or a sidewalk if we need bike and pedestrian access there? Does it have curb cuts or curb pullouts for transit vehicles if it's on a transit route? Are we using our existing right-of-way as efficiently as possible? Is it doing appropriate, is it managing appropriate stormwater? These are the kinds of things we want to look at because it's a way to take the principal goals and objectives of the comprehensive plan and LRTP and turn it into policy that makes us better planners. So moving beyond our draft recommendations, I did want to talk a little bit about emerging technologies. This topic has come in, I think, every Plan Forum meeting. I know it's been in every set of public comments, and it comes up pretty regularly. People say, well, why are we building all this? Because everything's going to be on flying robots anyway. Well, I'm never say never to any of these things because I do feel like technologies are happening daily, and we do talk regularly about what is state of the practice, and I can tell you that state of the practice and planning for emerging technologies is probably changing weekly. So it's very difficult to give guidance to a municipality to say, here's what you should or should not invest in today. So I'll start at the top and just mention a couple of these topics to give you an idea of where we see this going in terms of recommendations in the LRTP. So the very first one, variable speed limits on a freeway network. So what does that mean? What it means is maybe when we're looking at US 17, maybe one of the solutions is we've got peak time speed limits and then off-peak speed limits. What it would do is slow some people down, help them look around and realize I need to pay better attention to this, and maybe our crash numbers will decrease in those corridors. So those are the types of things we're looking at. Whenever it comes time to get serious about municipal level planning and design for autonomous vehicles or connected vehicles, I did put truck platooning on here because that falls into that category, where we are working with a number of communities around the country who manage major freight movements, and we are looking at these technologies that are happening now to see how we can move things more efficiently and safely and less impactful than going out and building new roadways and bridges. So transit planning in the region, I wanted to talk about transit from the perspective of the town of Mount Pleasant does not operate transit service. It does not now and probably will not in the foreseeable future. That being said, our planning partner in this is BCD-COG, who works closely with CARTA and Tri-County Link to provide urban and rural transit service. So what I wanted to do is get you up to date on how we are partnering with them. So as mentioned, we're sharing data. So they provide us data, we're providing them data as they are doing their regional transit planning. In terms of public comments, we have lots of common project study areas, and certainly if you express interest in a certain type of transit opportunity in the region, then we want to make sure that comment gets back to them so they can incorporate that into their plans. I will mention that BCD-COG, CARTA, is staffed here at our meeting. Sharon Hollis from BCD-COG is present with us, and she is prepared to answer any or all of your transit-related questions. But I'll list their ongoing transit plans that certainly impact mobility in the town of Mount Pleasant. One is a regional park and ride study, building on the previously very successful express bus service that CARTA provides around the region. One is a regional transit framework plan that is looking at major corridors and areas where they could improve or modify the service they provide. And they are having an open house event tomorrow evening, and I put that information up here if you are interested in attending that. And that website does contain all of that project-related information, so please visit that if you're not able to go to the open house. Bus Rapid Transit is parlaying into that regional transit plan, so certainly if there's interest in that, we would want to make sure they are aware that Mount Pleasant is interested in that type of service. And then regular updates to fixed bus route service around the town of Mount Pleasant, special needs populations, whether that's physically handicapped or aging population. We have gotten a lot of comments about the concern for our aging community and whether or not they'll be able to have access to resources around the town and mobility choices there. So those are the kinds of things that we are partnering with them to make sure what we hear here works its way into their efforts on a regional level. I will say, in terms of an early victory or an early outcome of that coordination, I know Brad and Sharon have been working together to scope out a Town of Mount Pleasant circulator study, because there was some interest in such a service for the town. And so CARTA is taking a look at the feasibility of that type of service. So a huge thank you to them and that partnership. So moving ahead, it's time for you to get to work. You've just heard a lot. So your job now is to go engage a planner. There are lots of them in the corridor, and they're down the hall in the Emergency Operations Center. It's also kind of a fun opportunity to see some behind the scenes action around Town Hall. Please participate in the online survey. Everything you say, we hear it. Let me tell you, I mean, we are pouring through it, we quantify it, we slice it and dice it every way we possibly can, and please share it. It is free, it's a simple forward by text or email. Grab a copy of the handouts to share with colleagues at the office. And then we'll let you off for the summer, and then we need you back here in the fall to make sure we got it right. Please make sure we got it right on these draft recommendations, and then please make sure we got it right on those draft plans, where we'll have all of these recommendations much more refined. We'll have dollars attached to some of these concepts, and we'll start to move it into the capital improvement plan. So with that, let's see. We've got a few minutes. I'll take a few questions and answers, but I do want to make sure everybody, if you want to go ahead and move out and start asking questions, please do. Yes, sir.
I'm sure you heard of most of the survey responses, so I appreciate this overview, and I realize that you're midstream, you're analyzing the data, and assuming all that goes well, that's fantastic. The one thing I noticed that was absent from this, which is a major part of infrastructure, I think, or at least support to the town, is the school system. I didn't see CCSD up there. Are you dealing with CCSD and the development of schools? And secondly, transportation, schools, two big chunks about how we need to go forward with this town. If we can ratchet up to the 20,000 foot level, at the end of the day, will there be? If you can't expand Coleman to 8 lanes, do we just say no for development along Coleman? If CCSD for 10 years, do we just say no when development is going to bring more kids to the area?
Okay, so I'll address the first question, which is, are we partnering with CCSD at Charleston County School District? The short answer is yes, they are aware that we are moving through this process. Similarly to our other planning partners, 100% of our data and comments are available to anyone who's interested in having that. The planning office, the planning department here has a working relationship with CCSD. So in all of the land use planning efforts and transportation planning efforts that we have conducted to date, that staff internally to the town who has that connection, they have been speaking on behalf of CCSD. Okay, so the second part of that is the ability to say no. Do we say no to development? Do we say no to a transportation project? That is in the hands of the town. So for the first 6 months of this process, we took a look at establishing goals and objectives. Do we want to grow? Do we not want to grow? What kind of a community do we want to be? In that very thorough process of establishing goals and supporting objectives, it was loud and clear that we want controlled growth, that we want responsible growth that is partnered up between land use and transportation decisions. So that is where we are in terms of shaping these recommendations. And that is part of why the travel time reliability concept and format for evaluating performance emerged as the desired way of doing things, because traditional ways really don't tell the story. Because we did say pretty quickly, we're looking at a build-out plan. And build-out isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it will take a lot of discipline to implement the concepts that the community is asking for. Yes, sir.
Are we waiting for one grand document at the end? Or interim report showing progress to date? Because this is all big picture. It really doesn't give a lot.
Okay, so the question was, are we waiting for one grand document? And the answer is you're waiting for two grand documents. One is the comprehensive plan and one is the long-range transportation plan. And what I would call interim deliverables are these documents that we are putting out. They are summarizing draft recommendations. And similarly, these land use district maps that are in the Emergency Operations Center, I would go digest some of that and ask for help understanding that information, because it's a lot to learn. It's a very exciting time to pour through that. But it is our goal, working with town leadership. It has been our mission from day one to make this a very understandable process for everybody involved. That's part of why we're streaming this and making everything available online. And we are working very hard. We're looking at plan documents from other communities for elements of readability and really cutting through some of the heavy data analysis that does go into these types of documents. So the short answer is you're waiting for two grand documents that will come out later, early fall. I was about to say early this summer. It'll be early fall. Yes, sir. So for those of you who didn't hear, the question is, why are we only looking to 2040? And are we looking ahead to figure out what to do with these two major choke points that connect the town of Mount Pleasant? If I'm understanding correctly, you mean I-526 and US 17. These choke points that connect us to the rest of our region. So the 2040 horizon date for the LRTP, typically long-range plans look at anything from 20 to 30 years. And that is traditional guidance from Federal Highway Administration. It also goes back to the data we have available. We could do some trend line analysis, but as mentioned, whenever we start talking about build-out type scenarios, you know, we only want to look as far as we feel confident in the estimates. So that explains the horizon year. In terms of our bottlenecks or choke points that connect the town of Mount Pleasant to other parts of the region, that's exactly why we share data with our planning partners, and it's exactly why we aren't doing this plan by ourselves, because the financial element of an LRTP is greatly dependent on the funds available through our partners, such as Charleston County, SCDOT dollars, federal transportation dollars, and those projects are certainly significant to the town of Mount Pleasant, without a doubt. I don't think we could have had a better lessons learned experience than the last several weeks. But it also raises the profile of those connections to the rest of our state and our partners to understand the role of those facilities, and that it's not something the town of Mount Pleasant can do by itself. So I feel very sure that those projects and those facilities are very much on the radar of both this LRTP and others. Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, so, and this is one of our Plan Forum members, so you may want to thank her for her incredible dedication to the town of Mount Pleasant. So, in summary, and make sure I capture this correctly, the comments were, there is a tremendous amount of information, and it is pretty difficult to digest. It is highly technical in nature in many ways, and if you're not a full-time planner, you know, some of it may come across as Greek. So what we have begun to develop is a matrix of sorts that spells out a series of goals and objectives that were identified by the Plan Forum and reinforced or supported through the public engagement process, those 680 amazing hours of input. So goals and objectives will be very, very clearly described in these plan documents. The other side of that matrix will be our recommendations, and then you'll see the checks where this recommendation supports those goals and objectives. What are we trying to do? Who do we want to be? And these are the programs, policies, and projects that reinforce those concepts. And so we will present that in, I would call it an executive summary format, because it really does tell the story about what we're trying to do, where those ideas came from, and how do we turn that into reality in the form of programs, policies, and projects. Okay, I just want to look at the clock. It's 5 minutes after 6. The next presentation a repeat of this will start at 6:15. So I want to make sure you have time to go out there and begin digesting and asking your questions. But I'm happy to hang around. We'll give everybody a few more minutes to join us, so stay tuned. Well, I threw out the net and I couldn't catch too many more. I couldn't catch too many more people to come on in here. I think everybody's pretty engaged in conversations, which is a good thing. You can finish what you're saying. I just want to be mindful of other people's time before we jump into this. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Because we have an intimate crowd, does everybody have a copy of the handout? Or would anybody like one? I'll bring you one. Okay. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. We just walked through this about an hour ago with a much larger group, but I'll go ahead and give you the ground rules of our presentation. All the content is the same as what we talked through about an hour ago. What I plan to do is present to you for about 20 to 25 minutes. If you don't mind, please save questions for the end. I'm very happy to stick around and answer questions and discuss any of this material with you. But what I would strongly encourage you to do is engage the planners in the corridor as well as down the hall in the Emergency Operations Center, where our land use planning team is working very hard in talking about some character type plans in districts within the town. I will let you know that in the interest of reaching out to our community, people who are not able to be here in person this evening, we are streaming this presentation live through both YouTube, that is also linked to the town's web Facebook page, and we are being recorded so that at a later time people can click on the link and follow this presentation to learn what was happening this evening. So, jumping right into this, I do want to give you a little bit of an introduction to our planning team. If you've participated in our previous open houses, you've seen this information before, but I do want to reiterate the amazing team that we have working on this planning effort. Within the town, we've got Liz Boyles and Brad Morrison. Liz is in the planning department, Brad heads up the transportation department, and there is an army of staff working with them. And my name is Jenny Humphreys. I'm a consultant working for the town. I'm leading this effort in partnership with Greg Dale and Emily Crow of McBride Dale Clarion. And what we are bringing to this process is basically as team captains to make sure we have an outside perspective on the issues and the opportunities for the town and bring sort of state of the practice planning to this effort. So the purpose of tonight's meeting is to first learn about our draft LRTP, Long Range Transportation Plan recommendations, engage with our planners, our plan forum members who you'll see walking around with name tags like this on those district land use plans, and then please participate in our online survey. The information in your handout is available online. 100% of the information you see here tonight is available online. Someone asked earlier if it was okay to take pictures, take photographs of any of these materials. 100% of what we have going on is completely available online for public consumption. And please share it, by the way. It's easy and free to forward a link to somebody to participate in that survey. So I'll start out with just an overview of what this planning process is. We are essentially working on two major plan documents. One is a comprehensive plan, and one is a long-range transportation plan document. So what is a comp plan? It's an aspirational vision, and if you participated in this process earlier in the process, you would know that we spent the first several months of this establishing what is our vision for the town, what are our goals and objectives, and now that those are finalized, we're moving into the development of these recommendations that reinforce those goals and objectives for the town. The implementation tools that we have available to us are things that we use or that the town staff uses to move forward to implement and reinforce those goals and objectives. Those implementation tools are the Long-Range Transportation Plan, zoning code, capital improvement programs, and plans. So these are the 9 elements of the mandated updated every 5 years comprehensive plans. These 9 elements are very traditional. The previous plan document is available online for your review if you want to see an example of what that looks like. What's a little bit different about what we're doing this time is a traditional comprehensive plan has a transportation element that is actually pretty brief. You could think of it as a chapter in the comp plan, if you will. But what we're doing this time is developing a complete long-range transportation plan, which traditionally has these sections in it. We start out with an existing conditions review. We assess the needs, mobility needs of the community. We have a very robust public engagement process. We integrate with land use plans, and then we take a look at multimodal options for mobility. And then finally, we get into project identification, prioritization, and funding programs. So the town of Mount Pleasant is a little bit ahead of schedule. The comp plan needs to be done every 5 years. About a year ago, our town's leadership decided we're getting so much pressure to grow. We're having congestion problems on our roadway. How can we get ahead of this issue before it just spins wildly out of control? So they collectively decided to do the comp plan and LRTP together. It's amazing to most people that these are typically separate events. To me, as a professional planner who typically works in the transportation world, it's very exciting to do this together. And the town of Mount Pleasant is the first municipality in the state to actually join this process together. It feels a bit strange, but it's been a great process so far. This graphic illustrates those planning linkages. When these two plan documents are done independently of one another, you do a land use plan, and everybody comes together to say, this is what we want our town to look like. Then later, the transportation planners come in and say, oh boy, you sure did make a traffic mess over here. What are we going to do about this? It's been a great process to do this hand in hand so that we are literally making these decisions. We're looking at the same data on the same days. We're talking about these things weekly to make sure transportation recommendations support the land use decisions and vice versa. You'll see lots of common recommendations in both documents, as a matter of fact. Where are we in this process? We started last summer. We're right here on the red box where this is our third open house. And moving forward over the next few months, we will be developing these plan documents, and then we will look for your participation again in the fall to come back and take a look at those plan documents in draft form, so that as it moves through the adoption process with the various working committees and town council, we want to make sure you're engaged in that process to make sure we're getting this right. So this next slide illustrates the forces and trends that we've been looking at since last fall. This is data from the American Community Survey, which is part of the U.S. Census Bureau, as well as building permit data from the town of Mount Pleasant. This is historical data, and as well as the growth that we're seeing in the near term in terms of permitted, not yet constructed development in the town. My point in putting this in front of you is really to reiterate that we are working off the same sheet of music and same data as the comprehensive plan on land use. So let's jump right into the development of the long-range transportation plan. This planning process is basically a 5-step process. There's a tremendous amount of data collection going on. We develop a travel time reliability analysis to really hone in on those needs and conditions and needs on our transportation network. Public involvement's right smack in the middle because we do that throughout the process. We are right here at number 4, where we are developing some draft recommendations where we've been processing the data and public input and putting all that together, and that's what we'll be talking about this evening. And then we move into that finalization of the plan and really turning this into projects and programs for the town to move into reality. I'd like to highlight our plan partners on this. The town of Mount Pleasant, they are responsible for growth and development within the town, but I don't know too many people who make their transportation or mobility choices based on municipal boundaries. I think if you need to go to the doctor, you're going to go to the doctor wherever he or she is located, not necessarily because he or she is inside the town of Mount Pleasant. So transportation planning really is a regional planning effort. Charleston County is clearly a major partner in this, as they implement lots of projects within the town. They're a major funding source for our transportation projects. They're also a major partner on the land use and the comprehensive plan. BCD COG/CHATS, for those of you who are not familiar with what that means, BCD COG is the Berkeley Charleston Dorchester Council of Governments. And the Council of Governments is responsible for rural planning. They do land use planning, they do rural transportation planning. There are so many things that go on in the office of BCD COG, it would just boggle your mind. And CHATS is the urban MPO that is responsible for urban transportation planning and the management of federal transportation dollars. So clearly, they're also a funding partner, and they're a major data sharing partner for us. SCDOT is a major partner for obvious reasons, and CARTA and Tri-County Link, which is our rural transit agency. We work with all of these agencies throughout the development of this plan. So let's dig into some data. Safety and efficiency is at the core of all transportation plans. You want to make sure people can get where they need to go, do it safely and efficiently. So we started out by pulling this data in from the South Carolina Department of Public Safety. It's a 5-year snapshot of accidents that have happened within the town of Mount Pleasant. And each of those little red dots is a crash of some sort. And this map is not particularly helpful because you look at it and go, good grief, people crash everywhere. But we turn this into a heat map so we can start taking a look at where the locations where a greater number or density of crashes are happening. And clearly it starts to get refined onto that corridor level. And this probably looks pretty familiar, not too surprising to most of you because you know where people are having lots of rear end type accidents. As planners though, what do we do with this data? Well, what we want to know is what do we need to include in this plan to prevent some of these accidents from happening in the future? So we dig into all of those records, those accident records, to find out the cause of those issues. You may or may not be surprised, but nearly 90% of the crashes happening on the roads in the town of Mount Pleasant are the result of driver error. So I think distracted driving, things like this are becoming a major issue nationwide. But we want to dig into this and know our road surface conditions are things we can deal with. We can talk about work zone safety and things like that. So that's how that data works its way into our plan recommendations. We pulled out the bike and pedestrian related accidents because we heard a lot of public comment about, I don't feel comfortable biking here. This intersection is very dangerous for walking and so on. So what we did was overlay that public input with the actual crash data that we had available. So as planners, we wanted to overlay that with the available infrastructure we have in place. It's part of that needs assessment analysis to see, here we've got these gold and green and blue lines illustrate where we have some sort of a biker pedestrian facility, sidewalk, bike path, multi-use path, and overlay that with the accident to see where the gaps are. Are these user error issues, or do we need some infrastructure improvements to make these areas safer for those types of users? Another set of data that we look at are regional traffic patterns. I think these last couple weeks have illustrated to us very clearly our regional connectivity issues and how important it is to be able to get into and out of the town of Mount Pleasant on a daily basis. Working with a regional travel demand model, this is a traffic forecasting and planning tool that our partners over at BCD COG develop and maintain. They provided that data to us, these traffic models to us, and we backed all the way up to person trips to understand where are people making trips. And we separated those into work trips and then all other types of trips, say shopping, recreation. This other category also includes trucks and freight mobility trips, because as planners, the way we use this is to say, okay, who's making trips around town? How can we improve their mobility for these shorter distance trips? Do we have other modal options for them, whether it's a short distance bus route or a bike or pedestrian connection, or are our roads in good enough shape to keep people moving around the town? Now, looking at those work and other flows to other parts of the community and seeing where those external forces are, where are people living, where are the new jobs coming around our region, to make sure we are keeping people connected to the destinations they need to reach on a daily basis, whether it's work, whether it's recreation, or other trip types. That's where this goes. Earlier today, we were in a work session with the Plan Forum, and when we talked through this slide, it was very fascinating to watch those planning linkages just drop right in front of everybody's eyes. Because not only are we planning for regional and local connectivity and mobility, but on the land use side of things, immediately people start thinking about, gosh, well, look at this trend in jobs. Are all the jobs going to be outside of the town of Mount Pleasant? So that immediately took the focus right back to the comprehensive plan and the issue of economic development. Are we looking at land use in a smart enough way to, again, incorporate those linkages between mobility and our decisions on land use? So travel time reliability. This is a major part of our analysis in terms of making sure people can get where they need to go in an efficient way. Traditionally, we looked at this in terms of level of service, which you might have seen before, which looks a lot like a school report card, where if a roadway has very smooth travel, very free flow, comfortable conditions, it's a level service A, just like on your report card. And if it's failing and heavily congested and you're late every time you use this road, it's going to have a failing level service of F. In working with the Plan Forum, we decided collectively that we wanted to have a better metric to evaluate the performance of our roadways, because A, B, C, or D just didn't really feel right, because sometimes in terms of planning, D is deemed acceptable, but that didn't feel right to the Plan Forum. So we went in this direction to talk in terms of travel time reliability. So existing conditions, travel time reliability is measured the difference between free flow speed on the roadway compared to congested conditions, that difference in travel time. So in this map, these are 2015 existing conditions. This is part of our existing conditions overview. And then using that regional travel demand model data, we take a look at 2040 travel conditions. So similar to the origin destination data and looking at these 2040 forecasts, this is not necessarily our destiny as the town of Mount Pleasant. What we're looking at is, if we take our current comprehensive plan in terms of the land use decisions that are in there and drop it onto the roadway network we expect to have in place in 2040, this is how it should perform. And so these are some sections you would expect to see. US 17 out here, Long Point Road, these types of areas, that's pretty much where you would expect to slow down. And it might take you twice as long to use those roads at peak time than it would in the middle of the afternoon when traffic is not quite as heavy. But if we are not comfortable with these results, now we get into that process of taking a look at what land use decisions are we making? Are we comfortable with the traffic performance based on those? And what improvements do we think we need to make to our roadway network? And are we comfortable with those results? So that's the process we are headed into now, but I wanted you to understand how we are communicating, how we're performing, how we're evaluating the performance of our network. All of that data is the science end of planning. And if we depended only on the data, I cannot even begin to estimate how many lanes of roadway we would have out here. If all we did was look at the numbers, we would be bubble wrapped and have a whole bunch of lanes out here. But what we did here with the public engagement process, which will continue throughout the rest of the plan development, is blending the input we have heard from the community into our recommendations and our review of the data to make sure we don't have holes in the data and make sure our recommendations reflect the goals of the community. So through 2 public open houses, We have collected over 2,000 online surveys, and on average, people spent 20 minutes on that survey. Some people spent 5 minutes, some people spent an hour, and as a planning team, we are completely humbled and impressed and thankful for the commitment this community has put into this plan development. Every comment is read, and so many of them are turning into concepts and recommendations. So thank you 100 times over from the town's leadership, because our marching orders a year ago were very clear about reach out to the public and make sure this is rooted in the concerns and the interests of the town. Okay, so let's jump into the recommendations we're coming up with. We put recommendations of the LRTP and the comp plan into, well, I'll talk specifically about the LRTP this way, into two major buckets. One is infrastructure improvements, which is exactly how it reads. These are projects that could be construction related, they could be changes to our signal system, it could be a new system of signs. It is something that is an improvement to infrastructure. The second category are policies and programs. These are things that could become part of a zoning code, it could become part of design guidelines, it could be something in the form of site design guidelines that support different types of mobility. It's a wide range of possibilities. But again, it's that linkage between the comp plan and the LRTP. So this map, I don't expect you to be able to see that very clearly because there's a lot of information on this slide, but this map is available online, it's available in your handout, and there's a list, a table detailing some of these projects on your handout as well. These are the projects, the recommendations that are in the form of infrastructure improvements. These are the red dots and blue dots should be viewed as intersection improvements, and those could take the form of perhaps modifying the signal timing, it could be adding a turn lane, it could be redesigning an intersection to be a roundabout. We don't know those answers yet, but those are what we would call at this point in the plan as being problem intersections. And if something is missing here, we want your feedback. The blue lines on the map are proposed widening projects. The green lines are proposed new alignment, new construction roadways, and the lighter blue that you see here, those are streetscaping projects. That's where we may not be adding capacity, but we could be adding something like street trees or more of a beautification modification to the roadway. One thing to note here that I've had some questions about, this potential corridor projects. You'll see that throughout US 17 and also up on Long Point Road. And what a corridor improvement project means in this context is this is a location where we have a road that is not functioning as well as we would like it to, but we don't expect to come in and widen it. So what we want to do is evaluate other types of options for mobility, things like improved signal systems, perhaps reconfigure some intersections or interchanges to improve the mobility within that corridor. Now the source of these projects is long, it's listed here in this box. Some of these projects have been carried forward from previous capital improvement programs that the town has had in the works for quite some time. Other projects were identified during the CHATS regional long-range transportation plan process. The MPO does a very robust plan development process with lots of public outreach, and some of those projects are located, that they heard through that regional effort, are located in the town. So we wanted to make sure we were aligned with them in terms of evaluating those projects as well. Some items were identified through the data analysis process, and then others came straight out of public input where we heard resounding comments about a particular roadway or intersection or deficiency. Another recommendation that falls into this category is bike and pedestrian related. For now, it's being termed the Mount Pleasant Way. This is a town-wide bike and pedestrian network that was first conceptualized through the town-wide bike and pedestrian plan a number of years ago. and it has continued to stay in the conversation. And as we were developing goals and objectives for the comp plan and for the LRTP, the desire to have a non-auto network connecting the various resources of the town has just come up over and over and over again. So what we tried to do here is refine this concept a little bit to make sure that this network provides access to the full range of residential resources, natural resources, our recreational resources, economic centers, our settlement communities, so people could get in touch with our historical resources around the town, and this is where we are. This is, you'll be able to read this in better detail on a board out in the corridor, and we do have some renderings of some typical sections. In some cases, this could end up being a shared bike lane. Ideally, it would be a separated or protected multi-use path for less stressful use by more recreational type users. In addition to the Mount Pleasant Way, and there's a board illustrating this outside, is a network of bike and pedestrian network connectivity links throughout the town. So moving beyond infrastructure improvements, you might have heard the term, you can't build your way out of congestion. And that is certainly true in just about every community. So as part of this LRTP and comp plan process, what we are doing is developing a whole series of policies and programs that we want the town to turn into code through this planning process. We are looking for your feedback on this. These are program areas at this time, and as we develop more refined policies and programs, what we want to do is get your feedback on these topics so that we know where to place as much emphasis as possible. Many of these are self-explanatory, but I'll give you an idea of how to interpret what we're asking you to respond to. If you look at number 4, policies and programs the town may implement to achieve maximum efficiency of existing infrastructure. So this bubbled up out of multiple goals and objectives of being environmentally sustainable, financially sustainable and responsible in its planning, have minimal impacts on the environment, limit growth, or make better choices in terms of infrastructure development. If we turn this into a series of policies, it would turn into something such as, okay, we're looking at US 17 as a corridor study. This turns into the recommendation to decide ahead of time, we are not expanding the footprint of US 17. We want to take advantage of technologies. We want to take advantage of other ways to manage traffic better. Another thing this can turn into is saying, well, this road is functioning fine, but we're having maybe a stormwater management problem in that area. How can we use the roadway infrastructure to complement the need for improved stormwater management in that area? So that's one way we'll turn these program and policy areas into recommendations for the town. And some of those things will not appear in the LRTP. Some of them will show up in the comp plan or elsewhere. So emerging technologies, you can imagine some of the colorful conversations about flying robots and, you know, why do we need bridges? Because we're all just going to use jetpacks to get wherever we need to go. And while some people are of the opinion that this is not worth looking at, many people, we have heard through the plan forum, we've heard through public comments, that emerging technologies must be addressed in this LRTP. So I'll dig into a couple of these to give you an idea of where we think some of these are headed. The first bullet point is variable speed limits on a freeway network. And for those of you who don't know what that means, it could be an option for US 17, where you have digital speed limit signs that adjust based on traffic conditions. So maybe during peak time, we're clearly having safety issues there. We're having congestion issues. Maybe if we can reduce the speeds during peak time, It may make drivers a little more mindful of safety issues and things like this, and may improve traffic flow. And then we can put the speed limit back up during those off-peak times to help people move through more quickly whenever it's safe to do so. Autonomous and connected vehicles. Some of you may have driven a car here tonight that lets you know that you're about to swerve out of your lane. So this technology is developing very quickly. It's advancing very quickly. The guidance on that is not moving quite as quickly because the private industry is working very fast on this type of development. But applications for that type of technology within the town could be in the form of working with the freight community and looking at options such as truck platooning. We do have a major port terminal that affects our traffic here in the town. And so what truck platooning does is it allows multiple trucks who are connected electronically to travel together at higher speeds. And while it may seem very intimidating to see this coming, it's actually a very safe technology that's in development right now that we may want to partner with the port or our shipping industry to talk with them about how can we help make that happen and move freight more efficiently into and out of the town. But we'll see. At this time, we're digging into these options and partnering with the town to make sure what is a responsible recommendation, what's a conservative recommendation for a municipality to move in the direction of at this time. I do want to take a minute to talk about transit planning. The town of Mount Pleasant itself does not operate or provide transit service, but what it does do is it partners with BCD-COG, who operates and works closely with CARTA and Tri-County Link to provide transit services. And we agreed quite some time ago that we would not develop an independent transit plan for the town. Rather, what we would do is partner with BCD-COG, and they are here tonight. If you haven't visited their table yet, they are here to talk with us about their ongoing activities. But what I do want to share with you are what we are doing together. So we are sharing our data, and we are sharing public comments. So if somebody communicates to us through this development interest in certain types of transit programs, that information goes right back to CARTA and Tri-County Link so they can work that into their planning efforts. And vice versa, they're letting us know what they're up to so we can make sure we support them. The ongoing regional transit planning activities happening that could certainly affect the town of Mount Pleasant. Regional park and ride planning, they're getting much more aggressive in terms of providing that as a regional service, building on the previous successes with the express bus. I know they've also been doing that with the hospitality industry with downtown Charleston, so it's good to see some momentum with the park and ride service. They are developing a regional transit framework plan, so it's perfect timing for them to receive all of our input as they figure out which corridors are ripe for regional transit service. And I put a note here that they are having an open house tomorrow night over at Charleston Southern from 4 to 7 in the evening. But I also put their website on there in case you are not able to go, because they do a wonderful job of putting all of their information on that website. So please visit that and provide your feedback there to make sure they hear you 2 times. But I will say an early coordination point implementation topic is, as we did hear early on some interest in having an urban circulator or a town circulator of transit service, Brad Morrison of the Transportation Department communicated that to CARTA, and they have already progressed down the road of doing some sort of a feasibility study to take a look at the potential for that type of service around the town. So, moving ahead, it's time for everybody to get to work, and I know we are running out of time for our open house, but please, if you haven't already done so, engage a planner, ask questions, figure out what in the world we're doing and how we got here, and ask about anything you don't understand that will help you better provide feedback. Participate in the online survey. Please share that with your friends and colleagues, because as mentioned, we will use every bit of your feedback. Let us know if we're getting it right. Are we missing something? Let us know so that we can refine these concepts moving into the plan. In the fall, we'll invite you back to take a look at those two major plan documents, the LRTP and the comprehensive plan. There will be one more round of feedback on those refined recommendations as it goes into the adoption and implementation phase in the fall. So with that, I'm happy to answer questions, but I'll also encourage you to go talk. Yes?
Thank you. Great presentation.
Thanks.
Questions. I think there were.
Okay.
And I think you may have covered we're dealing with transportation planning. Are we trying to minimize with the travel?
So the question is, what are we trying to accomplish with the transportation plan? Are we minimizing trips? Are we minimizing time? Every community has a different set of goals and objectives. So far, the goals and objectives that I see emerging into performance measures, how are we measuring our success here, is efficiency, reliability, and safe modal options. I would boil it down into those three, because a trip, to quantify a trip, it's me walking out of this building and walking across the street is considered a trip. And really, you don't want to minimize trips. You want people to do what they would like to do. Now, modal choices, can I walk there? Can I do that safely? Those are the kinds of things that we want to make sure can happen throughout the development of this plan. So we're providing an efficient roadway network for the autos and trucks, for the people who need to use an auto or a truck. And are we providing safe options for people who don't want to do that or cannot, or may not have access to an auto or a truck? Are we providing resources for that as well? On the land use end of that might be where you're going with, are we trying to reduce trips? In terms of land use planning, and this came up loud and clear with that origin and destination data, is are we going to start looking at land use plans that keep trips short? Do we want mixed use type development where people don't need to go that far to make those multiple trips? I would say it's all the above, and it's a delicate balancing act.
And related to that,
Mm-hmm.
emerging technologies.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that 10 years ago we would have foreseen Uber, ride share.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at emerging.
So the question is, are we looking at emerging cultural shifts with things like technological advances, with options like Uber, rideshare? Are we taking a look at trends in retail patterns or distribution patterns? Again, I would call it a delicate balance, because some of these things are drastically different than they were 10 years ago. And in that technology department, we're also looking at the impacts of route choice apps, things like Waze. The good thing is it encourages drivers to use an available grid network, which is generally a very good thing for the efficiency of your network. The downside that we're also seeing is, there's some communities saying, hey, all of a sudden, this thing is routing people right down my street and it's a problem. So, there's a lot of wait and see, but we are trying to stay ahead of understanding those trends and making sure we're providing accordingly. Sure. Yes.
Has part of your process been to evaluate what the capacity is for the current structure?
So when you say the capacity, do you mean the roadway capacity?
In other words, you've calculated how many trips are happening.
Yes.
You know how many roadways we have. Do you know at what point we're done, that we can't put more cars on the road? Do you know that number?
So the question is are we looking at the available capacity of our roadway network next to the demand for roadway capacity and mobility on our existing land use. That is where these two maps, that's the data behind these two maps. That's existing conditions, and that's taking a look at the delay on the network, our travel time reliability, how is it performing, and collectively, and it's a subjective opinion of what level of mobility are we willing to accept. And that's when we start taking a look at the 2040, and that's what I was alluding to when I said, this doesn't have to be our destiny. This is an estimate based on trends that have been observed historically and the available data that we have based on our current comprehensive plan. Now's the time to look at the scenarios of high growth, low growth, modify this road, widen this road, add a parallel route here or there. Generally speaking, how is our critical network functioning, and is this acceptable to us? And there are varying opinions about what is acceptable. So if it's red, that means it's taking you twice as long as it should to use that roadway at peak time. Professionally, I would not call that acceptable. It's something we need to address in one form or fashion. Is it going to be a land use recommendation? We don't know yet. It's probably going to be a combination of both land use, development type recommendations, as well as infrastructure. Can we work on these signals? Can we provide other modes of transportation? Are there parallel connections? There is a board out there where connectivity is illustrated. The concept of providing better connectivity across the town-wide grid network has come up through the public engagement process. And so there are a series of connections that are being looked at to say, can you get better access taking multiple routes? Do you have multiple options to get where you need to go? So this is part of that the existing conditions and needs assessment analysis. But then moving forward, we start to look at those scenarios, and we collectively decide this is what we would be comfortable with. And that's part of the adoption process. Are we comfortable with what we're planning for? Yeah. Yes.
Two questions. You mentioned the non-networks.
A non-auto network would be a network of sidewalks, multi-use paths, other types of connections that are not.
The definition of non-auto. We're talking
Bike and pedestrian.
bike paths.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
We're talking
Autonomous vehicles would be considered autos or trucks. Yes. So the question is about high water.
Have we, 2040, that's
So the question is, are we looking at rising sea levels, stormwater management, drainage issues as part of this planning effort? The short answer is most definitely yes. As you go through the goals and objectives for the comp plan and LRTP, sustainability, resiliency are terms that you will see throughout those goals and objectives, and now the strategies that we're developing. And the way that will present itself in terms of recommendations will most likely be in the form of policies and programs where we may make recommendations along the lines of, if and when a roadway is modified, it incorporates this type of stormwater infrastructure, those types of concepts.
well, that's kind of the strategic view, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
looking that's.
Mm-hmm.
Are there specific?
We have, the question is, have we already looked at places that are currently experiencing water-related issues? And yes, we have received both public comments on this through the many online surveys and comments we've gotten from the public. But when we first initiated this plan development, we sat down with all of the department managers, and that topic did come up with the Public Works department. So we are aware of this concern, and we're working closely with Public Works as they work through a series of watershed plans and programs to make sure that the issues and things that they're finding through that process are clearly understood in terms of comp plan and transportation plan recommendations. Okay, yes. Okay, so the question is, what have we learned, or what might we be doing differently as a result of the recent closure of the bridge? The good news is not too much has been different about the path that we were on, mainly because of the goals and objectives that included sustainability and resiliency. And if you take a look at the potential policies and programs, I would point to number 2 on this list. Here we're talking about developing a policy to identify potential emergency scenarios and provide routing preferences or evacuation and route identification. We've already been working with Amanda Knight in the emergency management office here. She started last year, and she got dropped right into this process. And so that conversation started with weather events and flooding type events, but very quickly we learned that it could also include something like a bridge closure or an unexpected disruption to our transportation network. So that is where this is coming into play. I will make a note about 526. SCDOT is moving into the process to evaluate options for the entire corridor of 526 in terms of widening and reconfiguring interchanges, and without a doubt, an evaluation of those bridges is a part of that conversation. And I think it's safe to say that the town's leadership is certainly well aware of those implications as that moves forward. Okay. Yes, sir.
With regards to number 2.
Yes.
You're a professional in this business. Tell us, is it even fathomable to you that DOT was going to, and when they had to close it, 5 days to come up with a plan on how they're going to reroute things? I mean, is that, as a professional in the business, yeah?
Well, the question is it a surprise to know that an incident like this took place with the closure of the bridge without a contingency plan in place?
They've been working on
Okay.
these cables for years. The idea that they had comes as a surprise. So do they do this then?
Well, I can't speak to it in terms of what the discussions have been or have not been, but I do think that I would say in the last 18 months to 2 years, this topic of resiliency has become a very hot topic in the transportation planning and management world. Previous to that, it had more to do with how do we reverse lanes, how early do we evacuate, those types of things. But I think that dating back to things like Superstorm Sandy and seeing how and Hurricane Katrina, seeing how unprepared communities were to lose bridges, how unprepared communities were, this concept of resilience, it was much more of a let's just either evacuate or how do we fix it as quickly as possible. But I think thankfully, resiliency is becoming a much more important topic moving forward. Sadly, I think lots of communities are unprepared for disruptions in their network. So I think we should all be thankful for the opportunity for a lessons learned. So, anything else? Yes.
Do you know by chance how they come up with projected traffic as far as that number?
The question is, how do I know how they come up with estimated traffic on our roadways? I happen to know a lot about where that comes from, and it is a very data-intensive process that does start out with person trips. There are lots of formulas that are based on household surveys, household travel surveys that help figure out, you may have completed one. The Census Bureau puts them out. Lots of communities put them out. I know BCDCOG has done household surveys a couple times in the last 15 years. There's a data source called the National Household Travel Survey that we use to help figure out things like average trips per household. And then we slice and dice that by one-person household versus five-person households, and then income levels and all these different ways we look at it. Working with BCDCOG on how they forecast this data, it starts with land use data. How many people, how many jobs, and what types of households do we see? And then you apply those formulas to say how many person trips are going to be made. And then we use those same data sources to say, on average, how many single person cars, two-person cars, and then we assign them to the roadway network to see what routes are connecting them from their homes to their places of business or doctor's offices or shopping centers and things like that. And all of it is based on our demographic data that we develop in great detail and a lot of work with all of our planning agencies across the region. I will say the question earlier about trends, cultural trends, are we looking at that? It is very interesting to see those trip rates increase and decrease as different technologies and modal choices emerge over time. So. Hotels are a part of that formula. It goes back to the employment type, and I'm trying to think of what's in that model in terms of trip generation at hotels. It is service employment. Thank you, Brad. It's based on the service employment at those locations. Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Cars per room, you've got a car coming, you've got a car leaving. That's a lot of rooms. A lot of people coming and a lot of people going. So
Mm-hmm.
how accurate do you think your data is, especially with the new trend of all this?
So the question is how accurate, or what's our level of confidence in the trip data that we are seeing with the number of hotels in the town of Mount Pleasant. And well, I'm as confident in that data as I am all of the other land uses we have in there. It is very reasonable, though, as we move into taking a look at the demand on our network to see what those person trips look like. Does it look reasonable? Yes or no? And what modal choices can we work with there? So if we do have some high density land uses like a hotel or an apartment complex or something like that, that lets us go back to, all right, well, if those densities are there, does it make sense to provide them other modes of transportation? Should they be connected to a greater network by a bike or pedestrian path? Because if it is something like a hotel, does it make sense to provide that connection to a recreation type land use to give people that modal option when they're making trips? So that if they need to take an auto, they take an auto, but they also have other options available to them.
Are there, I know this is, I think it's great that transportation is working hand in hand with planning.
Mm-hmm.
And I've noticed on a lot of projects that the planning does not have the
when you say parking is creating a problem, is it people waiting to access a parking spot, or there's inadequate?
It's inadequate,
Okay,
referring mostly to Boulevard.
okay. So the question is, are we looking at places where parking or lack of is potentially causing a greater transportation challenge? Should we be taking a look at parking demand in terms of,
When they clean up up there, there's not enough parking for the units,
mhm,
and there's a lot of on-street parking that's creating sort of a cases when you go down to Fairway,
mhm.
one lane. Parking garage is too small for cars that we generated because it wasn't one car per unit, it's
I see.
cars per unit.
So if what you're seeing is potentially inadequate parking being built or provided for certain types of developments, how does that make its way into the plan? So if we hear that, then from the public, if this becomes a comment into the plan, which it will, what we then do is sit with the transportation department and talk about where all are we seeing this issue. And then we also talk with the land use planning team to say, what are the guidelines in terms of what are you telling people they have to build? And we basically do a lessons learned. Is that enough, or is it too much? And then we have a discussion about recommendations for parking requirements for developments.
And it's
Mhm.
also on Stewart Ingles.
Okay. Okay.
And they have a big retail.
Hmm. Okay. Good to know.
So we need to, try to formulate.
Okay. Good to know. Thank you for that. Yes.
Another issue. Was there aren't enough seats for butts. And it's dangerous at worst, and bus.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Especially here up north,
Mm-hmm.
you were zoned for school, that's where you went.
Mm-hmm.
Here, charter schools,
Mhm.
like kids are going all over the place. They're not just going where they're necessarily. You end up with a lot of
Mm-hmm.
passenger cars because after they drop them off, you've got a lot of kids on. Get from Rivertown
Mm-hmm.
to the Dunes West,
Mm-hmm.
now been changed, but it was over 45 minutes.
So the question is
It's not really a question,
yeah.
it's more like better transportation schools, or are you working with schools on that too?
We've heard a lot of comments on this topic, both bus mobility options, safety for the autos trying to get to and from schools, the congestion caused by that, the safe access for students who are walking or biking and trying to get there if they live close by. We have heard this quite a good bit. So there are people within the planning department who are liaisons with Charleston County Schools. And so we are moving in the direction of, and that would fall in this category of policies and programs to enhance that partnership to take a look at school mobility. Because it's a safety issue, it's an efficiency issue, and at the end of the day, we need safe, efficient connections to our schools. So, thank you.
Sure.
Mhm.
Sure you can tell. But I lived actually on 17
Mhm.
up Little Piece, up in New Jersey.
Mhm.
And so at 4 and 17 in that area,
Mhm.
And I cannot tell you better the traffic move by getting rid of all of the lights and having people, if they have to exit off the right instead of going slowly left-hand lane looking for different. So I just thought I would
Mhm.
share that.
Thank you. Thank you.
You told me that's why I did too.
I appreciate it. Well, I know that there are a lot of people cleaning up in the hallway. I do want to cut you loose in case there are people out there you want to try to talk to before they scoot out of here. I am very happy to talk with anybody one-on-one as we wrap up this evening. But thank you for your time.
The subject of flyovers, is they one considered for 41 and 17?
I believe so.